Welcome. Today I'm going to talk about the evolution of technology and the impact it's had on the sport of golf. And before I dive into that, I want to give you a little bit of a background on myself and how I think it's relevant. I was born and raised and live in Rochester, New York. I'll get a little bit more into that in the next couple of slides. My golf career, if you want to categorize it as that, spans over 25 years. I started when I was about 8 or 9, and I played competitively in high school. I still continue to do so today in local district qualifiers and some championships. I'm currently at a 4.2 handicap. My lowest was a 3.7 late this summer for the non-golfers. All that means is, depending on the difficulty of the course, I average about a handful of strokes over par, give or take. My first and only hole-in-one so far was on August 23rd, 2016. And it was at a NICA convention with rented clubs, of course, in Williamsburg, Virginia. And coincidentally enough, I was playing with 3 other Volt Academy graduates. 2 of those 3 have holes-in-one of their own. So just by being in this program, it's increased your chances of getting a hole-in-one yourself for the golfers. Another important, and probably more important note on that date is that is the day before my wedding anniversary. So now, because of my hole-in-one, I never forget my wedding anniversary. Next, I mentioned I was from Rochester, New York. Rochester is, in my eyes, Golf Town, USA. It's a small place, but we are home to over 70-plus private, public, executive, par 3 municipal courses in our greater area. We've been ranked number 10 best golf city in the United States, number 1 for affordability. We are home to Oak Hill Country Club, which has hosted over 11 major golf events. There's also 2 future PGA championships scheduled to be on the docket. Oak Hill Country Club lays claim to that no other golf course in the world can say, and that is that they've hosted a PGA championship, a senior PGA championship, a U.S. Amateur Open, U.S. Open, U.S. Senior Open, and a Ryder Cup. And they did this all over a 24-year span. It's truly one of the last traditional courses around the country, and we'll get a little bit into the sense of traditional. Rochester is also rich in the development of the women's game. Between Locust Hill and Monroe Golf Club, we've hosted the LPGA Championship from 2010 to 2014, and the Country Club of Rochester has also hosted 2 U.S. Women's Amateur Opens, or 2 U.S. Women's Opens and a Women's Amateur Open. I'm not going to pretend that everybody knows where Rochester, New York is. It is in New York, but we are not New York City. In the upper right-hand corner is a map. We are on the south shore of Lake Ontario in upstate New York, smack dab in the middle of Buffalo and Syracuse, about an hour and 15-minute drive or either way. Population is about 1.2 million in the greater area. The picture on your left, the larger picture, is of Monroe County, the county in which Rochester is located. Downtown is indicated by the red star. All those green flags are golf courses. The dark green flags are public courses, and the light green flags are private courses. In the lower right-hand corner, if you zoom out to show the adjacent counties around Monroe County, those are all additional public and private courses. From downtown Rochester, all of these courses are within a 40-minute drive. So there's your 70-plus courses in the area. We're also home to a few notable icons and legends, one being Walter Hagen, birthplace of Walter Hagen. He earned his claim to fame by being the first native-born American to win the British Open. That was in 1922. He was also he's won 75 professional events, was part of the inaugural class of the World Golf Hall of Fame in 1994, and he has 11 major championships, which puts him 3rd on the all-time list behind Tiger Woods at 14 and Jack Nicklaus at 18. We are also birthplace of Robert Trent Jones, who's a world-renowned golf course architect. he has designed or redesigned over 500 golf courses in 45 states and 35 countries. An anecdote about Robert Trent Jones is in his redesign of Baltusrol Golf Club in New Jersey, a lot of the members were complaining that his redesign of the fourth hole as a par 3 made it too long and too difficult. So he challenged the club pro and 2 members of the course to play the hole with them, and they all went out, and the club pro and the 2 members hit their ball safely, landed it safely on the green. Mr. Jones got up, pulled out his 4-iron, teed off, the ball took off the club face, landed on the green, rolled up, and dropped in the hole. After that, legend has it that he turned to his playing partners and said, "Gentlemen, the hole is fair." So, also, maybe not an icon or a legend, but we're also home to PGA professional Jeff Sluman, who has 18 professional wins, including the 1988 PGA Championship. He currently plays on the Champions Tour, which is just a nicer name for the over 50 senior tour. All right, so what does that have to do with anything? How does that make me qualified to speak on the topic of technology in golf? It doesn't at all, not even in the least bit. But the unique thing with golf brings me to a quote by a famous course designer, Pete Dye, who's probably most famously known for his design of TPC Sawgrass, located just outside of Jacksonville, for the number 17th Island Green. A lot of people that don't golf are at least aware of that hole. He said the ardent golfer would play Mount Everest if somebody put a flagstick on top. And I am that ardent golfer. The sport, I've been playing for 25 years, but the sport truly bit me, and it's become an addiction over the past 4 or 5 years. And I think the unique thing about golf is no matter how good you are or how terrible you are, it's the one thing that people, no matter how terrible you are, still keep coming back to playing it and have a love and a passion for it. And hopefully that's come out so far. So I want to just give a brief history on golf because I think it provides some context on where technology has gone. The concept of hitting an object with a stick at a target has been around since the dawn of time, but golf in its current form was founded back in Scotland in the 1400s. The first American appearance of the sport was noted in the mid-1600s in what is now Albany, New York. There were sightings that men were warned for playing golf. It was golf, but with a K, because they were playing it on a Sunday. And then 2 years later, there was actually an ordinance passed that prohibited golf from being played in the streets because it was breaking too many windows. So then fast forward, during the late 1800s, the sport exploded all over the world. Then it really started to take off. 1894, the United States Golf Association was formed, or the USGA. That's basically the governing body of golf, or the rules of golf. Since then, the number of clubs started popping up all over the country, and they've exploded exponentially to where we're at, hovering around 15,000 across the United States. So that brings us to equipment. Now, there are a number of aspects of equipment in golf with shoes, gloves, apparel, tees, but for today's purpose, I'm just going to focus on the 2 key elements in the ball and the club. First, a golf ball. Before the times of just ripping a tree branch off a limb off a tree and hitting a rock with it, they had rocks, wood, and it was carved. But the golf ball truly started to take form with the invention of the feathery, and that was in early 1600s. So the feathery was a piece of hide, either cow or horse hide, that was sewn similar to like a baseball pattern with the stitching. It was turned inside out, and then it was stuffed with goose feathers, about a top hat amount of goose feathers in each ball. This was all done wet. So as it was sewn together and as the hide would dry, leather would shrink, and as the feathers would dry, they would expand, and it made a really, really tight ball. The problem with that is that because of the handmade aspect of it, it was very expensive. golf, if you play in early morning, late afternoon, the ground is wet and dew, the ball gets waterlogged, it doesn't really go anywhere, and it was very prone to the stitching breaking and constantly needed a lot of repairs. So then it was the gutta percha, or gutty, in the mid-1800s that kind of took it to the next level. This is a rubber-like sap that comes from the tropical gutta tree, and it is formed by being heated up, poured into a mold, and formed into a ball shape. These could be easily produced, which solved the affordability issue. The problem is that they were so smooth, they didn't really fly. It didn't really work well with aerodynamics, so they didn't really fly very far. But it was discovered that after taking many hits on the balls or with the clubs and the nicks and the gouges it would take, the ball would actually fly better. So later in its development, they added a raised dimple pattern that was, they called it a bramble cast, and it was named after the bramble fruit. So that brings us to the Haskell, or rubber core ball. In 1898, Coburn Haskell came up with the idea of using a rubber core ball wound with rubber threads, and then he would coat the outside of it with the gutta percha material. That was around for a while and proved successful and hung on after it was after its performance in the 1902 U.S. and British Open. A lot of golfers were using that style ball, so it stuck there. And then shortly after, in the late or early 1900s, they discovered that inverting those dimples on the golf ball would make the ball flight pattern travel even further, straighter. And then that was where the modern golf ball was born. And then now today they're using various types of rubber, various types of plastic to coat it. So the golf ball industry is definitely big business. So on to the golf club. Again, before the tree branch off the limb off the tree, in the 1400s, we had the first generation of the golf club. This was used, the shafts were made of ash or hazelwood, and the heads were made of beech or hollywood, harder wood. These were all handcrafted. It became difficult at times, so they started calling on experienced craftsmanship of bow and spear makers at the time, who found a new market that they could be in the golf club manufacturing business. It was almost certain that one of these clubs would break in an 18-hole round. So, and they were, not to mention, they were highly expensive to begin with, just in their handcrafted nature. So golf was truly only for the very upper echelon of society. Then in the 1800s, we move on to the second generation. The club builder in Scotland imported hickory wood from America and was using that wood, which was much cheaper, in the shafts. And then on the golf club heads, it moved to the hardwood that was replaced is now persimmon wood. And then it was blacksmiths started experimenting with forging irons for irons. But the persimmon wood kind of hung around for a while. But it was this that led to our next generation, and that's present clubs. So we didn't go from this to this overnight. You know, it's kind of, there's a very large period from the 1920s to present, but it was really the introduction of the steel shaft. I mean, the persimmon wood heads were still around even in the 80s and even into the 90s, but there was slow modifications mainly on the irons up through time. Golf kind of took a little bit of a hit during the Depression and war era, but after that, technology took a boom in the 70s, and they started experimenting with all these different technologies with graphite, titanium, steel. I know you're not supposed to put a lot of text on a slide, but I did this intentionally just to show you what clubs were made of, what they are now. And actually, as of the date I put this slide together, it's already outdated. This isn't even all-inclusive. Materials are constantly being invented. Companies are spending millions and millions of dollars on club technology, innovation, and I'll get into this as we progress along. So before I kind of want to show you the impact that this has had on the game, let's look at some of the failed technologies over the years. Some of these, the Cleveland VAS 792s, these were got a bent hosel. It almost looks like the shaft is detached from the club. And then they slapped a purple shock absorbing system on the back of it. The Alien Sand Wedge, probably one of your first kind of made for TV infomercial type clubs. Very good out of the bunker, admittingly, but it wasn't really good for much else. The bottom left is the Nike Sasquatch. That one is probably one people are most familiar with that do golf. It's the ugliest golf club I've ever seen. And for those of you with kids, do you know if, or young kids, older kids, when you hear your child crying off in the distance, you know it's your kid? When I'm on the golf course and I hear what sounds like children hitting rocks with an aluminum baseball bat, I look up, I go, that's a Nike Sasquatch. Every time somebody is, and whenever I find and see where that noise came from, it's somebody walking away upset at the result of their shot. Coincidentally enough, Nike is no longer in the golf club manufacturing business, and I believe it is firmly solely because they made this golf club. The Odyssey tri-ball putter, they had a 2-ball putter that was popular. They said, if 2 is good, why not go with 3? It's extremely large. The picture doesn't do it justice, but when it's sticking out of your bag and it overwhelms the rest of your clubs in the golf bag. And then finally, probably the most gimmicky club was the hollow point bullet. You know, they said, why have a solid driver when you can have one with a hole in it? Something tells me the patent is still pending on that design. So let's back to all of this technology. What kind of impact has this had on the sport of golf? What you're looking at is the average driving distance on tour over the past almost 40 years. And in 1997, it starts off in the 80s at, if you can't read that, at about 257 yards average, up to in 2018 about 295. In 1997, John Daly was the first golfer on tour to average over 300 yards, and at that time he was 30 yards longer than the average of the rest of the tour. Now, the entire tour averages 295, and it won't be but 5 years before the average on the tour is over 300 yards. Pay special attention to the sharp incline from the early 90s to the early 2000s. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Not to mention, has technology resulted in this expansion or this big booming distance increase, but the golf athlete has also changed during the same time. So on your left is John Daly. His physique was the norm a few decades ago. I mean, not that bad, but nobody was on the level of what you see in Rory McIlroy. Even Rory, when he first started on the tour, was just a string bean little kid with not golf. Some of the training regimens of golfers today rivals that of football, basketball, baseball, hockey. Some of them, I'm sure, are doing CrossFit. I know they have incorporated into their routines. But pair those two together, and you see why the distance has increased as it has. So has this had some unintended consequences on the sport of golf? Let's look at the numbers. Over the past decade, there has been a 10% decline in the number of golfers in the United States. from 30 million in 2006 to right around 25 million now. And 2018 will mark the 13th consecutive year of net golf course closures in the United States. So why is this? I believe there are 3 reasons why people are putting down their golf clubs. 1, golf takes too long to play. 2, it's too expensive. And 3, it's too hard. It's just too difficult. This is where I'm going to add in a little bit of my commentary. I am of the opinion that those 3 reasons are either directly or indirectly a result of this rapid increase in technology or in distance that we've seen because of technology, and in part, the athlete is changing too. Because people are hitting the ball further, golf courses, in order to still maintain a challenge for their members or average players or routine players, they need to make the golf course more difficult. That being either making it longer to adapt to the longer club technology, or if they can't make it longer, toughening course conditions, be it adding bunkers, adding thicker rough, faster greens, and all this is either directly or indirectly those 3 reasons that I mentioned earlier, and I'll break those down. Golf takes too long. Now, there is evidence out there that just by making a golf course longer doesn't necessarily mean that it takes longer to play. But what does cause delays are backups. So with this longer technology, what you're seeing now more and more is on par 5s or on a short par 4 on the tee box, golfers are waiting for the foursome in front of them to clear the green to go for it, which is causing a bottleneck behind them. That is adding to the length of play in golf today. I'm also not, this one is probably less related to the technology and distance explosion, but I also have a feeling that in today's viewpoint on child rearing in society, it's not as excusable as it was at one point for one parent to leave the other parent alone for an entire day on the golf course. So I'm sure that does play an important role into why it's taking this long. Golf is too expensive. This one I feel is directly related. All those changes that golf courses are making in order to still be a challenge to the golfer cost money. Whether it be buying more real estate to make your course longer, it's the cost to purchase the land, it's the cost to water this newfound land. If you're adding bunkers or water hazards, it's the construction that goes into it. If you're making rough thicker with the fertilizers, and then on top of it, the maintenance and the equipment to manicure it. All that comes at a cost, and that cost has to get passed on to the consumer. Also, golf is too difficult. For the reasons that I mentioned, unless you're willing to purchase the newer technology that changes it's like cell phones, that changes that fast and keep up with the changing of the difficult courses, you're going to get lost and eaten alive by the newer, tougher course conditions. So that's why golf it's just too difficult with what courses have been doing to adapt to this increased distance. So what I've laid out is an argument that it's not new. It's a debate that's been going on for some time in the sport of golf, for at least a decade. And there are 2 theories. One is status quo. What has been happening is fine. The rate of distance growth in the sport is healthy. Even that large spike that we saw from the early 90s to the early 2000s, that was when golf technology really ramped up. But when the USGA implemented limits on the size and that some of these clubs could go to, a lot of the manufacturers started reaching those limits in the early 2000s. So once that happened, you saw the distance line kind of start to level off and just inch up a little bit at a time. And what they claim is that growth is healthy and stable, so long as the USGA continues to enforce the rules already in effect. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought, which I believe is clear where I stand on this position, is the rollback. So it's tough to go back on the technology with the clubs, but an easy way you can do that is through the golf ball. And the thought here is, even if we agree that the rate of distance currently is at a healthy, sustainable pace, that it's like if the ship is sinking slower now, it's still sinking. We're already past the point of the problem. So you'll see golf legends like Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player are calling for changing the golf ball technology to basically limit its ability to travel at about 75% of what it currently can today. Now, having said that, and laying out these two positions, I know that nothing is going to happen with this. It's team swing away is gonna win. By the way, that's long drive champ Ryan Steenberg, also from Rochester, New York. They're going to win because, one, money. There's way too much money in golf for any sort of slowdown to happen in technology. According to a World Golf Foundation study, the golf industry was responsible for $84 billion in economic activity in 2016. That was a 22% increase from just 5 years earlier. The game also supports 1.9 million jobs and $59 billion in compensation. So not to mention, if it weren't for sponsorships, endorsement deals, the game of golf as we know it would not exist. And the number two reason of why they will not reel in golf technology and limit how far guys can hit the ball is chicks dig the long ball. So if you've seen golfers, Pro Tour golfers' wives, they tend to flock to, money might have something to do with that as well. But that's all for me on technology and golf. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer, but thank you for your time.